Thanks so much for that really nice introduction. I really appreciate it. I also appreciate the opportunity to be able to create a springboard for discussion talking about the radiology reading room of the future. It's been a topic that's been a strong interest of mine for many years, pretty much since we set up the world's first filmless radiology department in Baltimore back in 1993. I think there's never been a more critical need for an improved radiology reading room than today. The volume and complexities of studies are at an all-time high, especially with the increasing shortage of radiologists. I'm really amazed at how little has been written about strategies to optimize efficiency and productivity while minimizing physical and mental stress. I think a lot of this type of work really is not perceived as advancing science, and really there's relatively limited funding for the type of research into how can radiologists practice in a way that's more efficient and productive and yet maintain safety for the radiologists and the patients. Strategies for this have been a secret sauce for many years for some of the large teleradiology and other large radiology practices, but even there, I think there's tremendous room for improvement. I'd like to talk about a couple of notable efforts um, toward the radiology reading room of the future. One was organized by the Academy for Radiology and Biomedical Imaging Research, and as they define it, it is an effort to empower precision medicine by bringing together cutting-edge diagnostic technology and advanced AI-based computing to better match patients with best treatments and create the optimal working environment for radiologists and other clinicians. And so, in pursuit of this, the Academy organized a symposium in 2017 and also a NIST workshop in 2018. Another notable effort has been an NIH multidisciplinary think tank that was called Cognition and Medical Image Perception. And I had the pleasure of participating in that, where there were multiple representatives from radiology and pathology, but also cognitive psychologists and others who are in perception science, looking at some of the issues related to cognitive load and overload for physicians. And so they convened this to identify critical unsolved problems related to visual perception in pathology and radiology, and to determine the greatest needs to advance medical image perception. It was a really interesting think tank, and it resulted in this article, Advancing Research on Medical Image Perception by Strengthening Multidisciplinary Collaboration. Research that we performed many years ago at the Baltimore VA Medical Center indicated that radiologists spend only around 15% of their time in image evaluation, according to our time motion studies. The rest of the time waiting for and organizing studies, searching through prior reports and clinical information, dictating and reviewing speech recognition, creating impressions, and many other tasks. Most radiologists spend surprisingly little time thinking about redefining their workflow process. There's very little published in the imaging literature about improving productivity, despite lots of papers recently describing radiologist burnout. Also, other challenges include the fact that software for reviewing imaging studies is typically inefficient. There's poor integration of information and communication systems, and there are many deficiencies in most of our practices with regard to ergonomics. In fact, an increasing number of radiologists are complaining of repetitive motion disorders, eye strain, neck pain, that in many cases are impairing their work and home activities. These are likely to have a substantial impact on radiologist performance with regard to both speed and accuracy. 87% of radiologists, according to a study, indicate that they experience physical discomfort associated with the radiology reading rooms. 2/3 of radiologists experience eye fatigue, 56% neck strain, and 52% of radiologists struggle with neck pain. And after implementing digital mammography, 60% of breast imagers reported suffering from repetitive stress injuries, even though only about 17% use an ergonomics mouse and only 13% have had any ergonomics training. And so many of these challenges provided the inspiration for our Radiology Reading Room of the Future project 20 years ago. We still call our redesigned radiology reading room at the Baltimore VA the Radiology Reading Room of the Future, even now 20 years later. But by now, I think it's time for us to reimagine the reading room for the next 20 years. You know, what will we be anticipating out to the year 2042? If you look at some of the history of how things have evolved, here's a radiologist back at the end of the film-based era, actually holding a film at an angle, trying to use that as a strategy to find a central line, which was surprisingly effective on film, but certainly without the advantages of edge enhancement and other things that we're able to do with today's AI systems. Here's our reading room, kind of first pass circa 1993 with analog monitors, and kind of this was, of course, pre-radiology reading room design. We got together a team of architects, lighting experts, and acoustic experts, environmental engineers, and radiologists back then, and they came up with a design for a much improved radiology reading room with regard to lighting, acoustics, ventilation, and many other things that, you know, I'll call the Radiology Reading Room of the Future 1.0, and this was around about 11 years ago. What we wanted to learn from the Radiology Reading Room of the Future 1.0 version was whether or not we were able to reduce stress and burnout, to improve productivity, and to allow us to cope with an increasing volume per radiologist and increasing complexity of information even back then. And so as we rethought the Radiology Reading Room of the Future, we looked at ways to maximize visibility and communication and to simplify, you know, the ability to be able to have access between radiologists and those who they were consulting for. Some suggestions that we heard were to look at the ability to relocate some of the reading rooms closer to where our imaging modalities and technologists are, and some suggestions even suggested that we look at moving the reading areas closer to the points of care, such as the emergency department or the intensive care unit. Dr. Allison Tillich studied the impact of proximity on communications and visibility in a breast center where there were radiologists that were embedded in the breast center with musculoskeletal radiologists embedded in orthopedics, and she observed the bidirectional phone and face-to-face communications. And she observed, as one might expect, a statistically significant increase in the number of visits to these embedded radiology groups that were doing reading closer to where the clinical care was being provided. The study shows that proximity clearly increases the frequency of interaction. And this idea of locating radiologists with clinicians was, of course, disrupted with the onset of the pandemic. The pandemic has created, as you all know, a major shift over the past couple of years, resulting in a significant increase in the number of radiologists who were reading at home and had to adapt their home office or other home space environments to become a radiology reading room. One of the things that we learned with regard to room design was, in order to maximize productivity and reduce visual fatigue and increase concentration, we had to look at ambient and task lighting in the reading rooms, floor and ceiling materials such as acoustic absorbing materials, wall and partition coverings, HVAC, and also sound control. With regard to room lighting, we learned a number of different things, including the fact that ambient room brightness should match that of the monitors, which have been getting brighter and brighter recently, both medical grade monitors and commercial off-the-shelf monitors. We learned that LED lighting is best, and most of us have made the transition to LED lighting, particularly because it's dimmable, and we found that relatively quote-unquote warmer temperatures, closer to 3,000 degrees, that gave off sort of a light that was more similar to what we were used to with incandescent bulbs or the light of the sun, natural lighting, was optimal. We've eliminated fluorescent lighting and provided individual task lighting at workstations so that the radiologist could control their light locally. And we also even looked into programmable lighting that might change ambient lighting during the course of the day. We found that dimmable lighting controls are preferred to maximize flexibility for each individual radiologist. We found that blue lighting indirectly had a favorable impact on visual acuity and minimized stress. And so we have blue light source that illuminates the wall behind the radiologist's workstation. With regard to environmental controls, we looked at adding ventilation and heating. And so the new Radiology Room 1.0 includes workstations with individual controls for each workstation user to be able to adjust airflow and to be able to increase the temperature of the air. And so here's an example of a radiologist at our radiology reading room. And here's an example of some of the controls that we have associated with the workstations. One of the challenges that we had in the analog film-based environment and also with the early PACS environment was lack of integration of information systems. And so as you can see here, you've got a radiologist with a phone that's stretching across the room and a very non-ergonomically thought out solution. All of these functions, including speech recognition, can be integrated into a single computer workstation. I'd like to profile Dr. John Mukai, who's a radiologist at St. Vincent's Hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts. And he's really passionate and has presented and written a lot about optimizing productivity using a 6-monitor workstation. And he's explored all sorts of different options and looked at all sorts of ways that he might be able to become a little bit more efficient while minimizing stress. He has an optimized speech recognition headset and also a specially designed workstation and chair, as you can see. And he's been a proponent of multiple monitors that are synchronized that allow a radiologist to be able to have as much information as possible during the course of image interpretation. And he's put a tremendous amount of time and thinking into hanging protocols and monitor placement and also audio communications. He calls his concept the RADFLOWSPACE cockpit. And his mantra is 2 seconds are too long and 2 steps are too many. Dr. Mukai works to optimize what he refers to as the auditory space with a headset that offers noise isolation or cancellation and a microphone that's not handheld. He uses voice commands to execute workflow scripts, and he uses the same interface for dictation as the one he uses to make and receive telephone calls. With regard to the visual space, he recommends multiple monitors that are both high resolution and large. For example, 43-inch monitors, which I know is larger than the vast majority of us use, with the ability to display on a single monitor 6 high-resolution windows, with perhaps 3 of these large monitors for a total of 18 synchronized windows for a study that may have multiple prior examinations. And so his idea would be to have all of the relevant studies arranged on a large number of windows that are provided by these 3 monitors. He believes it's really important during practice to minimize the use of large muscle groups and minimize repetitive motions of the mouse. And he's studied the substantial differences in quality and function of various flywheel or jog wheel mouse systems. He also believes that it's really important to optimize the location of monitors, chairs, the desktop, etc., to achieve what he might call a Zen feeling of flow as a radiologist in an optimally arranged workspace. One of his areas of major emphasis is on hanging protocols on multiple monitors. One of the things that he and I would very much like to see is, rather than the radiologist having to a priori specify how they want their images arranged, to have PACS software or image visualization software observe the radiologist's behavior and then automatically learn and anticipate and arrange images according to the interpretation pattern of an individual radiologist. It would also be optimal to queue each study to be read and its hanging protocol into the computer so that when a study is completed, the next study comes up virtually instantly. Our radiology reading room 1.0 has sound absorbing materials in all the rooms and acoustic paneling and carpeting, but also one of the technologies that we use is a sound masking system that generates noise in the general frequency range of the human voice. It works surprisingly well to attenuate the sound of our MRI scanner, which is nearby, and noise from the nearby hospital lobby. One of the things that we found with the sound masking technology, which I'd highly recommend you explore if you don't have this already, is that it improves speech recognition at low levels of sound masking. So you can turn up the sound masking significantly, but at low levels, we found that it actually improves speech recognition. We've explored music and white noise and think that depending on the radiologist's preferences, it may have a positive impact on improving productivity and reducing fatigue. We also installed a technology and explored the technology where a beam of directed sound from above is used to allow a radiologist in a reading area to enjoy music or sounds, but it's focused to the point where it really doesn't disturb others and can't be heard outside of that radiologist's own space. We've looked at a number of different workstation solutions over time and found that some of the ones that were the most complex were the most prone to having problems, so we try to keep things as simple as we can. We looked at the concept of the dental chair, or sort of the pilot's cockpit. We had heard that some of the Nighthawk type of teleradiology practices were having significant success with radiologists reading in a reclined position, but in our own hands, we found that after a nice lunch and a warm, relaxing, soundproof environment, that we didn't necessarily always achieve the improvements in productivity that we had hoped for.
This concept is helping some doctors here in Baltimore stay in shape while they're doing their job.
Yeah, I love the idea of a treadmill at your desk. It's just one of the great innovative ideas at the Baltimore Veterans Hospital downtown. 11 News reporter Jennifer Franciotti has the story.
At first glance, you'd think Dr. Amit Patel is working out. She is exercising, but she's primarily working on this state-of-the-art treadmill workstation. It can go up to 2 miles per hour, and while she walks, Dr. Patel is able to read radiology reports, dictate notes, and more.
Having the opportunity to get up and move around during the workday, I think, is not only beneficial for your health, but it helps you mix up your workday a little bit.
We found that a subset of radiologists were really excited about walking on a treadmill while they read, but the majority of them were not. And so we ended up recycling that walk station as a really interesting experiment, but certainly not one that was practical for our own reading environment. We've done research on alternative interfaces and input devices and found that some devices, such as this Roller Mouse Pro, seem to have a very significant increase in productivity while maintaining a significant degree of ergonomics to reduce repetitive stress disorders. Although we found Tom Cruise's performance in Minority Report to be inspiring, we don't believe that the large arm motions would really be suitable for a radiologist, as Dr. John Mukai had pointed out as well. We also looked into Microsoft's multi-touch Surface table, the whole idea of whether or not radiologists could do complex arrangement of images and text using a touchscreen-based system. I'm really looking forward to Jesse Courtier's presentation on virtual reality and augmented reality later in the program, but virtual reality and augmented reality are becoming widely available, and particularly with Facebook's switch to the metaverse and with the emergence of the Oculus Rift 2, more and more people are exploring virtual reality, which completely replaces one's environment and is highly immersive. Augmented reality with systems such as the Microsoft HoloLens or Google Glass supplement one's environment. You can still see what's in your space, but it projects additional elements on top of that. And so Iron Man's Jarvis was an example of augmented reality, where Iron Man was able to see what was happening in his space and his environment, and yet there was information or objects that were superimposed in his field of view. There's some really interesting implications for the radiology reading room of the future. One interesting implication is the potential for supplemental image displays to be projected in one's own reading room space. And so one can have actual physical monitors, but augmented reality gives one the potential for superimposed virtual additional monitors. Also, just using only a virtual reality paradigm, one could be in a virtual space that was a radiology virtual reading room, sitting in one's chair, for example, and then be able to create a completely immersive radiology reading room, including operational and functional monitors. And so the potential to be able to have that level of flexibility to create your own space in a manner as similar or analogous perhaps to creating backgrounds for Zoom or team meetings, I think is really intriguing. And so the implications are the potential for fully customizable virtual workstations with a limitless number of monitors, custom hanging protocols that can be tailored to the individual virtual space that you set up. The implications are pretty profound for being able to essentially pick space in your own environment or your own wall with augmented reality, or to create your own reality with virtual reality. And so there are implications for the potential to be able to take an object that one is examining, say a complex set of cardiac anomalies on a complex MR or CT of the heart, and then potentially be able to create a three-dimensional reconstruction that would float in space, or appear to float in space, in a augmented reality real environment or a completely simulated virtual reality environment. The challenge that we have at this point is that the head-mounted displays, even in 2022, are still pretty bulky. And so the future really looks at technologies that would allow a wider field of view and also less obtrusive or intrusive displays. So in the next few years, we anticipate a couple of techniques, including waveguide techniques and pinlight displays, that could offer a significantly greater field of view and might be a little bit more socially acceptable, that look a little bit more like conventional glasses than the more alien or outer space looking Google Glass. And finally, it may be, several years, but there's already prototypical work on retinal displays where photons are scanned directly into the eye with an infinite depth of field performance that could essentially work even outdoors, and true 3D stereo with depth modulation as far as two different areas of view for each eye. There's been work with a system called Magic Leap that projects a light field into each eye that's been around ever since 2013. And then in the longer time period, the potential for a wearable contact lens that would be unobtrusive. It has significant technical challenges, but there has been some interesting work that's been done looking at these. These would clearly be much more socially acceptable. There would be a wider field of view, and there are companies that are working on this type of immersive display for augmented reality. The second radiologist that I'd like to profile, Dr. Sami of Chicago Telerad, has a really fascinating paradigm for his practice. He's in an amphitheater with 6 scribes, and those 6 scribes, who you can see pictured here with a couple of medical students who are sitting right behind him, who are just there observing, demonstrates that the scribes are able to call up images on each of their workstations, and then Dr. Sami takes over after the images are already called up and arranged, and as Dr. Sami makes findings and observations and impressions, they end up creating a structured report for Dr. Sami to sign. What's interesting is that he has increased his productivity using those scribes by a factor of more than 4 and perhaps as much as 8-fold. And what he's able to do is to significantly increase his efficiency. In studies that we have done in the past, we found that radiologists are only looking at images and forming their impressions about 15% of the time. The other 85%, which is an area of or time of inefficiency, they end up waiting for images, arranging images, structuring the report, calling up programs, and communicating findings when appropriate to referring clinicians. And so his scribes do the majority of those things after Dr. Sami signs the report. So let me just show you Dr. Sami in action.
pretty good, straight and narrow. Negative, right? Okay, all right, very good. What we got there? Okay, so the metallic artifact in this.
So this is really an interesting paradigm. And one of the questions is, could AI software perform the work of Dr. Sami's 6 scribes? Could AI software do smart hanging protocols to rearrange the images optimally and learn as Dr. Sami ends up practicing and looking at more and more studies? The AI software could concatenate the images into a single series and summarize the findings into an impression. Software already exists to perform the majority of these functions. And so natural language understanding has been used to turn free-form reporting into a structured format to present to the radiologist for signature. This is sort of a more advanced form of exception reporting which already exists. One could also have communication of results of unexpected, urgent, and critical findings. AI software also exists to do this, reading the reports in addition to tracking the findings. And so these functions performed by Dr. Sami's 6 scribes could also be performed with AI software that is already out there in production. And certainly that software will get better with time. The emphasis with AI in imaging currently is in detection of disease, lung nodules, intracranial hemorrhage, pneumothorax, pulmonary embolism. And I think this is going to become ubiquitous in the next 10 years with most practices using some form of AI that's automatically applied to the appropriate studies before image interpretation is made by the radiologist. And I think we're going to be mainly using platforms similar to Apple or Google Play's app stores. Whether or not those platforms are from independent vendors or whether they're from PACS vendors, it'll be interesting to see in the next few years. Another current function of AI for the reading room of the future is to triage cases so that studies, for example, with a high suspicion of intracranial bleed can be brought to the top of a radiologist's work list. Another example is the potential for AI to separate high probability of positive finding studies from normal cases. This has already been explored and written up nicely in an article for mammography, where it was found that the computer algorithm could identify a subset of, say, 90% of cases where it had a very high level of confidence were normal, leaving only 10% for extra radiologist scrutiny, and achieving an accuracy that was as high as the radiologist looking at all of the cases. We talked about radiologists reading more at home during the pandemic, and I think it's possible to actually be more productive at home. Advances in internet speed, monitor technology, and video streaming technology have, along with other technologies, enabled remote image interpretation to rival performance that one would typically get in a hospital or outpatient imaging center reading environment. Technologies to facilitate at-home reading include fast and reliable internet with minimal latency, which is important for video streaming. Also, there are internet routers that are able to improve encryption for patient security and privacy. And off-the-shelf monitors and medical-grade monitors are becoming brighter and higher resolution, and with adequate memory and performance, one can achieve high levels of throughput reading remotely. Of course, it's associated with elimination of commuting times, more flexible hours. Some radiologists find that there are more distractions at home. Some radiologists find there are fewer distractions at home. And so, almost 30 years after creating the first digital filmless radiology reading room, we're now ready to reimagine the radiology reading room of the future. Advances in artificial intelligence are going to play a major role in not only making findings and creating quantitative measurements, but also in enhancing workflow efficiency. The rapid advances that we're seeing in virtual reality and augmented reality may create the virtual radiology reading room of the future. but there are going to have to be major advances in form factor, resolution, and refresh rates to make this a viable alternative to a physical reading room environment. So I hope that that was a good springboard for discussion. Really looking forward to some questions and any comments that you may have. Thanks so much for attending and for the opportunity for me to share some of my thoughts and ideas.